Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 737 for the 20th of November, 2022. Richard Saunders coming to you early in the morning from Moraine, Sydney, Australia. Moraine, and in the last week we have seen terrible pictures on the news stories here of very bad flooding in Australia, in my state of New South Wales. Homes swept away and towns underwater. It's frightening, and it's another reminder of how the climate is changing, which sort of leads us on to our very first topic today, our first segment, an interview with noted campaigner Xeon Lights from the UK. Now, Xeon was a spokesperson for Extinction Rebellion before leaving that organisation, owing to fundamental disagreements with the group's reasonings and activities. An interesting woman indeed. Find out more as I interview Xeon Lights, and then you might want to view the video of the presentation she gave to Sydney Skeptics in the pub some weeks ago, and I'll link to that in this week's show notes. Xeon Lights coming up at the top of the show. Following that, it's the Australian Skeptics Newsletter, read once again all the way from snowy, cold and snowy Canada by Adrienne Hill. Speaking of strange weather, all my listeners in New York, I've been looking at the news feeds too and seeing a ridiculous amount of snow as high as the roofs. And it vaguely reminds me of my vague memories of living in Canada, Adrienne, in Saskatchewan when I was a very small boy. And on the prairie there we had snow right up to the roof. We had to dig our way out. I vaguely remember, and my dad took home movies of tunnels out of the house so we could get out. Hello to my listeners in Saskatchewan. Then to round off the show, it's more reports from the recent CSICon with our guest reporter Rob Palmer. And this week, amongst other people, Rob catches up with our old friend Brian Dunning, who gives us yet another update into his UFO movie, the UFO Movie THEY Don't Want You to See. I wonder who they are. Happy birthday to those people who've had a birthday in the last few weeks. And if you've just done some exams, I know lots of people are doing exams lately, or graduated with, I don't know, maybe a degree in science. Congratulations. The world certainly needs more scientists. But now it's time for me to run downstairs, open the fridge, and have I know it's probably not the right time of day, but yesterday I came across this very nice sort of Indian, Chinese-inspired, what shall we call it? It's like a topping you put on dumplings or something like that. It's spicy hot. It's spicy hot with both flavours intertwined, so a little bit of that on a cracker. That'll start my day well. While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Xeon Lights is a British author and activist known for her environmental work and science communication. She was a spokesperson for Extinction Rebellion, UK, on TV and radio between 2018 and 2020, and founded and edited the Extinction Rebellion's Hourglass newspaper. She wrote a column for the Huffington Post, authored the evidence-based non-fiction book The Ultimate Guide to Green Parenting, and contributed to Zero Waste Kids with humanitarian Rob Greenfield. She eventually left the Extinction Rebellion, set up her own activist group called Emergency Reactor, and now campaigns for clean, green, nuclear energy. And joining me now, it's Xeon Lights. Hello, Xeon.
Hello. Hi. Or should I say g'day?
Hi. G'day. Yes. I'll say good morning to you. It's evening here because of the way the world works. Great to catch up with you, and thank you once again because you were a recent guest speaker here at Sydney Skeptics in the pub. And that was actually the first time I've seen you talk. I thought it was a great presentation. Is that something you'd like to do, to get out there and talk to the public?
You know, I actually really like writing. I'm more of a writer, and that's the bit that I really enjoy. But I get invited to so many speaking to events to speak that I feel, you know, it's super important that I do that, and it has an interactive element where you can, you know, answer questions, which I think are really important, which you can't do through just writing articles. So I do it because it's important.
Now, when you say you love writing, where are you published? Blogs or magazines or something like that?
So I write for national press around the world. So in the UK, I've written for the Metro, the Telegraph, Open Democracy. Last week I was in the New Statesman. You know, in France, I've written for La Tribune, Atlantico, Marianne, L'Opinion, L'Express. I've even been on the cover of Die Welt, which is Germany's main newspaper, which was a bit of a coup because Germans, you know, have a very anti-nuclear perspective generally. So yeah, I've been in a lot of press all around the world, and I really enjoy that element of writing and getting my message out there that way.
Well, that's quite a range. That's quite a range of magazines you're writing for. But don't be immodest. I guess you are in demand.
I guess so. I think people really want to hear different views, and I, partly because of my background, which is quite unusual, you know, anything that I say represents a kind of different view because
right.
I've come from such an unusual space. So, you know, I was a climate activist for a long time, and a very you know, how do I say, like very involved, visible climate activist, and not just someone in a group. You know, I was one of the spokespeople for Extinction Rebellion, and now I talk about, you know, people should vaccinate, and GMOs are good, and nuclear power is good, and that's quite shocking to a lot of people even now, because obviously a lot of the kind of objection to those things came from that movement that I was part of for a long time. So a lot of people want to hear that firsthand, even though I write about these things a lot. And also just, I think they're interested in the kind of aspect of, you know, what does it take to change your mind? How do you appeal to different people? There's a lot mixed up in there that actually you don't hear a lot of people talking about generally, especially in kind of mainstream coverage. So yeah, I do a lot of writing and also television appearances, and in a few documentaries, and you know, often on international news channels, talking about different angles around, you know, still the same sort of issues, climate action, but how can we do it in an evidence-based way?
Now, as I was saying in the little blurb before we began to talk, you were part of Extinction Rebellion, and yes, we've heard of Extinction Rebellion here in Australia. And I want to say that apart from anything else, it takes a bit of bottle. It takes a bit of courage to take extreme action and really put yourself out there.
I guess so. People say that a lot, but I just feel like I'm doing the right thing, and that, you know, that was for me. I decided I need to do the right thing because I spent so many years essentially spreading misinformation about these things, but not intentionally, you know, because that was what I had been taught in these groups. And I feel that, you know, if you want to cause positive change, create positive change in the world, and then you find out that your message has actually kind of been doing the opposite, well, I have to correct that. That was wrong. And I put my hand up and said that was wrong. So now I do everything I can to kind of undo that damage, and also to make sure that other people aren't misinformed. Because when I went into these groups, I was young, I was really misled. You know, I'm not going to say people were deliberately doing it. I think they also had been misled, and it just passes along down the chain. And so it's really important to me that there are voices still in this movement who are taking a completely different approach, which is, again, you know, I'm quite unusual in this space, but yeah, I just think it's really important. I don't know about it being brave or not. I don't particularly feel brave. I mean, yeah, sometimes I get attacked by people even who are, before would have kind of looked up to me even, or people that I've worked with. But I just think that, we're just debating ideas, aren't we? Don't have to take it personally.
Or maybe I should say, I think it would take some courage to do the things you did. But now you mentioned this to me, and now we're speaking. It crossed my mind that did it take maybe even more courage to eventually reject a lot of the things you were told to educate yourself, and to those people become a bit of a turncoat, a traitor in their eyes. It can't have been a comfortable thing to do.
No, it was not. But like I say, it was the right thing to do. And it did, doing so has appealed to other people in some of these groups, not just Extinction Rebellion, but in other groups like Greenpeace, who have reached out to me since, even though, they're doing it privately. It's encouraged them to take that first step and say, actually, I agree with you, and maybe I should talk to some of my peers about this. And, maybe later they will end up also leaving, unless they can kind of change the movement on the inside. But I just think it's super important that they see someone doing it visibly, so that they feel able to also express that they hold scientific views. I think it's a little bit scary that you can't, in some of these groups, you can't hold evidence-based views. I think we should be a little bit concerned about that. So long as I'm doing good work and kind of helping to improve things, hopefully I don't mind the kind of attacks. I get called a traitor, I get called a shill, I get called a puppet. Who is she speaking for? Why is she, which is a bit offensive, actually, considering how hard I fought to have a voice in this movement, and considering the fact that I couldn't voice these things when I was more involved. That's when I was actually ironically more the puppet, because I was told, you don't say these things. You're not allowed, you're not allowed to talk about certain things. We want you to talk about these other things. That's what it means to be a spokesperson. And I have complete freedom from that now. So I just speak my mind. And I find that it's very convincing to people. Even if they don't necessarily agree with you right away, they will take away the ideas and think about it, because they've been able to have that interaction with you, which was not something I was able to do when I was a spokesperson, because I was just representing a group's views. And I couldn't, as you probably know, went on the Adrienne Hill show. It had, millions of people saw this, me go on there at live television and say, hey, I can't answer your question, Andrew. And, it wasn't that I couldn't, I wanted to, and I could in my own mind, but I couldn't as a spokesperson. So I made that decision. I'm here as a spokesperson. I'm not going to violate that by saying, well, actually, these are the things we should be doing, because that would not have been representing the group's aims. So but that really caught me out, because then it was all over the national press the next day. And the clip went viral online. It had millions of views. And people used it to say, hey, these groups are awful. They don't know anything. Look at this awful person who doesn't know anything. And I kind of said, hey, no, hang on. Hang on a minute. So that's when I kind of put my foot down and said, actually, here are some things that we could be fighting for, that good solutions, lots of, scientific consensus behind them. And I didn't know that would achieve anything, but it has done. So that's great.
I think so. And it's fascinating to think that what we might regard as cult behavior is gagging people or telling them what to say or what not to say when they come with an alternative point of view, maybe based on science or reason.
Mm-hmm. And it's so misleading, I don't know if you've seen in your press over there, but over here, there's a new group, which is kind of a splinter group from Extinction Rebellion, called Just Stop Oil. They only formed earlier this year, and I think February this year. And they've been doing a lot of kind of more hardcore protests, shutting motorways, even some quite kind of dangerous actions where I've kind of gone, oh, I'm surprised that they would do that. At least in the groups I was in, we're a lot more, considerate of people, like make sure people are looked after. And, anyway, it's pushed beyond that. Like I would say it's quite extreme. It's pushed way beyond that. You've got these really young people, people in their early 20s, suspending themselves from bridges, and they're posting these videos online talking about why they're doing it, and they're in tears. The last one, the young girl was in tears, and she said, I have to do this because I have no future. And I felt sorry for her, that that's what she's being told. But that is the lie that she's being sold, so that she will go and do, you know, quite dangerous actions, which actually, tell me how that's helping climate change. Tell me how that's helping to address climate change. You know, she's not talking about solutions. It's the same old line. We need to change the system. Politics is broken. You know, that all came from Extinction Rebellion, to be fair, but this group pushes it even harder. They just basically want kind of revolution. And then I saw that when that article went live with the video clip, she was getting a lot of hate, and I felt sorry for her. And I thought, actually, we should feel sorry for her. And this is not just, oh, these, you know, the people behind these protests are awful. I think some of them are. I know some of them. One of them was from Extinction Rebellion. He was awful in Extinction Rebellion too. Very much kind of extremist. Yeah, very much kind of cult leader. But it's not just that. I think society has failed her, you know, because like me, she's been misled. She's young. She's concerned about real issues, but she's then been told, you know, in your lifetime, there'll be societal collapse. This is what these young people are being told. In your lifetime, there'll be horrendous things that happen and you have to do something about it. And if you don't, it's on your shoulders. It is cult mentality. And there is, I'm a savior, and there is a solution to ending apocalypse, and you have to do this to achieve that. And I saw her cry, and I felt terrible. I felt so sorry for her. But all the hatred is directed at her from members of the public, people who, you know, were then stuck in traffic because she was blocking the road. And I thought, actually, she needs to be reached out to.
Yes, I agree with you. We've seen lots of videos here from Just Stop Oil. It's sometimes on the news. It's all over social media. And we see young kids, what I call young kids, in their late teens, early 20s. And yes, you're passionate when you're in your teens and early 20s. But I also see older people, maybe of my generation, maybe worried about their children, or maybe even others worried about their grandchildren.
Yeah, and so there's a couple of things in there, actually. One thing I'm going to point out when we talk about cult mentality. So when I was at Extinction Rebellion, I was often asked, when I did interviews, I was often asked, are they a cult? And I would defend them, and I'd say no. And look, there's a lot of elements, you know, although there was a central kind of core organizing group, which I was in, there were also a lot of autonomous groups, not just around the UK, but around the world, you know, around Europe, especially. And so those groups were often really nice, they're doing quite positive actions a lot of the time, good people, and I liked them. But the core organizing group that did want ultimately political revolution, you know, that was their third demand, replace the current existing system with citizen assemblies. That was their third demand. They were not, you know, secretive about that. That's a whole other, like a lot of these other groups that are kind of acting under the same label. They're not really pushing that ideology. They're genuinely just concerned about climate change, and they're trying to do their bit, and they're doing little actions, and it's getting in the press, and that's really positive for them. They feel like they're doing something, and it's getting a conversation going. So that, you know, I can understand. But what I was going to say is, we talk about this cult mentality. It's unfortunate truth is, because it comes from this core group, it has that impact on you know, what kind of actions we do, how we talk about climate change. And when I was in there, because I was a spokesperson, I had to do kind of media training. I was told by their media trainer, I was told, like, we want you to cry on TV. We need you need to do, come on, Zion, you can do it. And I hated it. And I never did it. But it was like, the first person to cry is going to get the medal, you know. What that was encouraged as a kind of emotionally manipulative tactic, to persuade the public and to make us look less like, you know, revolutionaries, because that's how some of the press was portraying us, and more like, you know, just someone people should care about and worry about because they're crying. And I never liked it, but it is, again, kind of a cultish tactic. And so that was the core group. So I do want to differentiate, because there's a lot of people who are involved who didn't even have contact with the core group. They're just doing their bit. The problem is that group was so powerful, and that messaging that we had was so powerful, that it's now, you know, it's influenced the entire climate movement. So you've got Greta saying the same things about the system needs to collapse. You've got Just Stop Oil splinter group, and we've got a couple of other splinter groups here as well, Ban UK Private Jets, and Insulate Britain, and they're all pushing the same message, which is the system causes problems, so the system has to go, which I think is ridiculous and also extremely misleading. But a lot of people don't really question it, and they just think, well, on a superficial level, yeah, it's true, but obviously it's not. Also burning fossil fuels, yeah, okay, burning fossil fuels cause these problems, but they also uplifted us so that we wouldn't live in poverty. For most of human history, we did live in poverty. Child mortality rates were abysmal. All of that changed because we burned a lot of fossil fuels. And I know that it's hard for people to hold those two ideas in their head because they're almost contradictory ideas, which are fossil fuels are bad, but fossil fuels are good. I understand that, but they pushed this message so much that fossil fuels were bad, which means that everything that we do and the way we live is bad. But what are they basically saying? How are they saying we should live? Should we live without things and without electricity? Well, a lot of them do believe that. They believe in this deep adaptation ideology. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's quite popular here. The Greens especially like it. And it is basically, if you read this paper, it's actually, unfortunately, by a professor called Tim Mendham. And it's very much about how you kind of go back to the land and living, like it uses this terminology, living simply, living within, how you're supposed to live, this idea of, it basically is idolizing poverty. I think it's outrageous. But because that's the flow of logic, people just sort of follow that flow of logic, which I think it's really important to challenge that and to bring in other elements and say, actually, we can maintain a high quality of life and also not trash the planet, which is why I then advocate for things like nuclear power, because it's a no-brainer. If you want to get off fossil fuels, that's a no-brainer, right? But then these groups also protest that. But the reason they're protesting that is because they don't want cheap, abundant electricity for everybody. They don't want that. And that, to me, is quite a scary thing.
Yes, this is a very interesting thing. It's the natural fallacy. It's the idea that the past is very romanticized, back to nature, living as one with the earth, and how easily we forget or we weren't aware that our ancestors normally didn't make it into old age, and many of them had to have lots of children in the hopes that some of those children just might survive past the first few years of life.
Yeah. Well, I've spoken to some of these, I've been in these groups for a long time. I used to be in the Green Party, which I left years ago. But people in the Green Party, leaders in the Green Party, like the actual leader of the Green Party at the time when I was involved, said to me, yeah, that is how we should live. If people die, they die. That's the natural order of things. And it's outrageous. It's almost like the land and the trees matter more than people. And for me, I'm trying to help make things better because I want people's lives to be better. Yes, I do care about biodiversity and animals and trees. I do care about all of that. But people also should be lifted out of poverty and should not, experience energy poverty and not be able to heat their homes in winter and etc. That's my main motivation. And that's where I'm completely coming at it from a different angle to the other groups, which unfortunately have created a very dominant ideology now everywhere in the world, where you even hear, I've heard kind of young climate activists around the world. Everyone says, oh, really powerful voice, listen to her speak or whatever. And I go and I listen because I think maybe that, we should listen to this person from this country. I haven't heard of you from there before on this issue. But they say exactly the same thing. They said, this system caused this and we need to change the system. Whereas actually, a couple of things there. First of all, you've got all these people saying we need to act right now on climate change. I mean, that was one of our slogans in Extinction Rebellion, act now. Well, how can we have time to completely change the system, if that's even possible, and then sort out climate change? Like that made no sense to me when I was in Extinction Rebellion. I used to argue with people about it. So there's that. But secondly, it's just not true. It's just not true, I mean, what are we saying if we had a different... I mean, there are communist countries in the world as well, right? So fine, Greta Thunberg hates capitalism. She blames capitalism. XR hates capitalism. But we do have other countries. Are they living in a back to the land sustainable way? Do they have net zero emissions? No. So it's not even true. And yeah, maybe there is another system somewhere magically, that could solve all of these problems. But I want to see evidence of that. I don't want to believe in some godlike figure, There's some magical solution. Sorry, not a religious person. That's not going to work for me. So I want to hear what that is. But when you ask them, they just say, we don't know yet. We have to build it. And that it's kind of scary to me, just you can't just throw out something because it needs some reform and it's made some mistakes in favor of something completely new that you don't know what it is yet. I mean, this is not a small matter. People will die when there are blackouts. We are in Britain, we have planned blackouts now for this winter, for the coldest days. That means you can't warm your home on the coldest days. Now, if we're lucky, we won't have a super cold winter. But the same thing's happening in Germany, where they do. They get proper snowy, cold winters. They're rationing. They're being told to ration how much energy they can use, how long you can have a shower for. I just, what a blinkered kind of view of humanity. Like, we should all just self-sacrifice and make ourselves as small as possible. How dare we take up space? Being alive on the planet has an impact on the planet. That's it. There's no way around that. But we can do things to mitigate, and we can do things to adapt, and we can use clean energy and, plant lots of trees, although that's not necessarily always the solution. But you know what I mean? Just look at different things we can do, create urban forests, or like protect specific regions of land. And we can live in harmony with our surroundings. Yes, we haven't done an amazing job at that because we burn lots of fossil fuels. But to be fair, we didn't know for a long time. And now it's hard to make that transition. But part of the reason it's hard is because they also are against implementing the solutions that we need. So all right, fine, you don't want nuclear. A lot of people would say renewables instead. But actually in Britain, even renewables, in the last year, there were 25 applications for solar farms that were rejected because people were against them, like local councils, residents. So it's kind of like, and that was the highest in history. So we are facing blackouts. Now, I would like to just build lots of nuclear everywhere, but I understand, maybe people prefer solar, maybe you can do that a bit quicker. But even that was protested. So you just kind of go, what is this about? Do people not understand? I mean, this is what it's about. People do not understand the absolute privilege they have when they can flick the switch and the light comes on. They do not understand where that comes from. And again, I think that is kind of society's failure. We should be teaching these things in schools, and we don't. So, how are people going to know about it unless they come to one of my talks? There's not a lot of people talking about it either. And that's a huge problem that needs to be addressed, that I don't even really see anyone talking about addressing, which is, I would say, it's got to be in the education system. How we create energy, how we are built on huge amounts of energy. Yes, the consequences that has also had environmentally, but everything has environmental consequences as well. Let's not forget that, whether it's solar, fossil fuels, or nuclear, or wind. And then you can have a load of young people who, instead of having crippling levels of anxiety, which also eco-anxiety, studies show that among young people it's just higher than ever before. Like, they're really anxious, which is why they're falling for these kind of cult-like movements and risky jail time and all of that. They will learn the problems early on, and they will be able to help create the solutions. Maybe they go into engineering. Maybe they realize, hey, actually, we need to build our way out of this, or other practical things. And that's not going to happen at the moment, because they get to the 20s, they don't really know about it. They don't know about it at all. They don't know about the solutions at all. They only have been told about the problem, and then they're told the solution is to go and get yourself arrested, which actually, as I say, it's not really helping, with the actual practical things that need to be done. And then they will say, well, but we got on TV and we got to talk about it. And I'm like, but you don't really need to go on TV and talk about the problems. Everybody knows about the problems. It's easy to be a pessimist and talk about the problems and we're all doomed and it's awful. What are the solutions? What are we actually going to implement? That's super important. So that's why I do it. But there's really not enough of us. I wish more people would do it. But I think it is hard to kind of back something. It's easy to be against things, easy to be pessimistic. I think there's even an assumption, if you're pessimistic, you're cleverer. Not necessarily, actually. I think it's harder to be optimistic. It's harder to think ahead to what will we need several years down the line? How do we get there? How do we build up, ourselves up, and protect the environment, rather than essentially we just give up, which is what that back to the land living kind of scenario is. We just give up. We did it wrong. Humans were wrong, like that's where we keep landing, because that's the dominant narrative. Those are the stories that are getting out. We need to tell better stories, I think.
Now, folks, you can see Xeon Light's presentation. It's online on YouTube to Sydney Skeptics in the Pub. I encourage you to watch that. It's a very interesting and entertaining presentation. She's also done TEDx talks. And if you Google her name, you'll find lots of references. Xeon, where would you like people to visit on the web to find out more?
Well, I have a website which I keep up to date with my speaking events and articles. All of my published articles are on there. That's just xeonlights.co.uk. But I also have a small campaign group called Emergency Reactor. And they have a website, emergencyreactor.org. And we just do, little actions, kind of always for solutions. It's quite a novel idea, but it's a good sort of positive way of getting the message out there. And we're always looking for people to get involved, even if it's just writing letters or setting up petitions or coming on protests. Although we're only really Britain based at the moment, but I'd love for people to do actions in other places. So we did one recently. We went down to the Greenpeace headquarters in London, and we dumped a load of fake coal on their doorstep, and we held up signs saying, less nuclear equals more fossil fuels, like stop protesting nuclear, because they're very, very heavy lobbyists against nuclear across Europe, very heavy, very involved. They've managed to get a lot of reactors shut down over the years. Every time they shut them down, what happens? It gets replaced with fossil fuels. It might be replaced a little bit with renewables, but the data shows it's predominantly fossil fuels that pick up the slack. So, we've done things like that. And if people want to stage similar actions, I'm always hopeful that somebody somewhere will one day. We can send you free posters and things, and some advice and maybe some tips on how to get started. But it's a good fun way to go out with your community of kind of like-minded people and try and promote a positive message instead of a negative one.
Well, Xeon, thank you very much for being on the Skeptic Zone. Thank you very much indeed for your presentation some weeks ago here in Skeptics in the Pub in Sydney. But for now, Xeon Lights, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Hello everyone, this is Adrienne Hill from Canada, here to read the highlights from the Australian Skeptics Newsletter. This is newsletter number 161. You can subscribe to this newsletter and get it delivered to your inbox every other week, complete with links to all the stories. Just visit www.skeptics.com.au. But now, let's see what Tim Mendham has for us this week. Hi all. Sad news is the recent death of Kendrick Fraser, a constant figure in the global skeptical scene, especially as editor of Skeptical Inquirer since 1977, the third issue in fact. An amazing achievement in anyone's book. Our thoughts are with his family and the crew at Skeptical Inquirer and CFI. On a happier note, SkeptiCon 2022 is just around the corner. There's still time to book your tickets for the convention and the dinner. Or just line up for the free social events. Details are below. Read on, Tim. Okay, Tim, we'll do just that. ASI News, your SkeptiCon 2022. Tickets are still available for 2 full days of some of the leading speakers on science, skepticism, and critical thinking from both Australia and overseas. Full details are on the Skepticon site. Visit www.skepticon.org.au for all the information. Then there is the convention dinner on December 3rd. the best way to mingle with other skeptics and speakers over a convivial 3-course meal, with bar tab and guest speakers for $85. The dinner is open to all, although numbers are limited. We look forward to seeing you at Skepticon 2022. Exporting traditional Indian medicine. The Indian government is promoting Ayurveda as a valid alternative to Western medicine, but its natural cures are insufficiently tested and sometimes dangerous. Nonetheless, at a recent convention, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi sat next to the World Health Organization Director General, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, as they celebrated the growing global impact of traditional Indian medicine. Together, they inaugurated the WHO Global Center for Traditional Medicine in Gujarat, built with a $250 million investment from the Indian government. I am speechless and giggleless. Columbia University disaffiliated from Dr. Oz. Well, that makes me happy. He lost his race for the U.S. Senate, and while Columbia University stayed silent on Dr. Oz during the election cycle, it quietly scrubbed him from its web pages and directories in what has struck many as a secretive attempt at disaffiliation. The recent changes came after years of criticism of Columbia by the medical community for maintaining ties to Oz, despite his promotion of pseudoscience and misinformation on his influential talk show. Believing is Seeing documentary. This is an interesting talk on so-called TikTok tics, young people discussing online how they suffer from involuntary movements such as found in Tourette syndrome. Dr. Robert Bartholomew, occasional contributor to The Skeptic, kicks off proceedings and asks if this is a real issue or mass psychogenic illness based on a belief. Well worth a watch for the 14-minute mini-documentary. As a side note, as many listeners may know, I have a strong connection with the Tourette syndrome world. In fact, I've given a talk for Monterey County Skeptics on this issue of TikTok tics, and I was actually asked after the talk if I thought that the sudden increase in mostly teenage girls showing up at emergency hospitals with sudden onset tics during the pandemic was possibly a mass psychogenic illness. My answer at that time and now is still, I don't know. This is a very complex issue that is still currently being studied. Neurologists Drs. Tamara Pringsheim and Davida Martino, both having co-written 2 papers on this topic, have called the phenomena of rapid onset tic-like behaviors, quote, a distinct subtype of functional neurological disorder, end quote, which are known disorders, and they were known before the pandemic. So time and science will help determine if this is indeed a mass psychogenic illness. Also, please don't panic and ban all social media from your family. The numbers, while significantly greater than pre-pandemic numbers, are still small globally. I have given Richard a link for the show notes to the University of Calgary's Tourette-OCD Alberta Network webpage, where you can find links to the published papers and more information on this very topic. There is also a link to my TikTok talk. Now, back to the newsletter. We are currently working on the December issue of The Skeptic magazine. Meanwhile, the September issue of The Skeptic magazine is out, with a major look at the mysterious and often secretive world of organized exorcism in Australia, and not just from the Catholic Church. Also included in the September issue are articles of dowsing priests, falling frogs, and tips on how to stay afloat on a sea of misinformation. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time to do so. You can sign up for a hard copy or digital edition, or both, since the digital is offered free to those who take up the hard copy version. Contact the editor if you're not sure if your existing subscription needs renewing. Learn more about our magazine and subscribe now. Visit www.skeptics.com.au. Research haunted location before paranormal investigation. Many paranormal investigators will tell you that you should never do any background research, as research tells you what you should be finding. This article tells you why you should do some research first. Of course, you could always bypass the time and effort of the visit or the research by just reaching this simple solution: don't bother. Do fireworks increase paranormal activity? It's commonly said within the paranormal community that hauntings increase as a result of the energy put out by fireworks displays. Maybe that's why pets go berserk when a rocket goes off beside them. Or maybe not. And I'm giggling even before the silliest story of the week. Ancient statue of a woman using laptop. Oh, that's interesting. Quote, time travel proof or an elaborate hoax, end quote. Well, not that elaborate, and no need to think it's a hoax. It's probably just a shallow box. Nonetheless, an interesting example of believing is seeing. Other silliest story of the week. K-pop star reveals she has a bored ghost. Lisa from the K-pop group Blackpink. No, we don't know who they are either. But maybe I shouldn't admit this. I do know who they are. Well, the Blackpinks have a garbage can that opens and closes by itself. Of course, it's the sort of can that has a sensor to open and close when someone is near. The cat? She thinks it's a bored ghost, just being bloody-minded. Or maybe the mechanism is on the fritz. Time for a new bin or a new cat. Well, that's all for now. This is Adrienne Hill signing off from one of 17 countries around the world that has only a single land border.
So the last event of CSICon 2022 just ended, and I caught up with Hannah and Aaron, who I first met here, I don't know, was it 5 years ago, 6 years ago at CSICon? And
6 years, I think.
Yeah, and then I haven't seen you guys because you were too busy or occupied with the armed forces, as I understand it, to attend. And it was great meeting you this year. So tell the audience a little bit about yourselves.
Okay. So I'm Aaron Fors. By trade, I'm an actor in Hollywood, in Los Angeles, California.
I heard a rumor that you speak Klingon.
I do. Yeah. In fact, I still do it when it comes up I do voiceover work a lot, and I do it on the new Star Trek shows, and a lot of what I do for that ends up being, there's all this technology, all this technobabble going on, in Star Trek, and so you need a whole lot of people talking in the background, with their little data pads and whatnot, doing BS science, and so I do that. I've got my, all that going on. And then now the new shows have really robust Klingon language, like Klingon mach tach judge, which means remain Klingon, basically.
Oh, I knew that.
Yeah. It's very kind of species nationalistic. But.
Okay, does Aaron do that at home?
Yes.
Yeah, especially because sometimes during the pandemic, we were recording at home. WB would send you these big booth things, these portable booths, and then you're huddled in there like it's a closet.
And anytime
grunting
he's angry, anytime he's angry, surely it comes out.
Yeah, I revert to my natural ways. But so yeah, I've been doing that. I've been working in Hollywood since I was 8 years old as an actor, but I grew up in a very artistic but a very science-oriented family. And
I was going to ask you what got you interested in coming to CSICon. So.
Yeah. My father was a geneticist in the early days of the field, and then a science teacher by the time I was around. And I always grew up with an obsessive love and passion for the way things worked and reality. And let me break open that microwave, sorry, Dad, and figure out how it works.
All right, so let me ask Hannah about yourself.
I was in the Army National Guard for 12 years, and I just got out. I finished. I thought about going in for the whole 20, and just financially and mentally, I figured no, this is the time. This is the time to get out.
And serving the country is the reason you couldn't come to the last CSICon.
Yeah, exactly. I would often have drill the same weekend, and it would be too late, and they wouldn't let me go and stuff like that.
Even for CSICon, did you
I
say it
know.
was for
I would try to tell them, like, come on, guys, it's really important
the military
work.
didn't have the proper appreciation for science.
Right? Oh my God. I loved being in the National Guard as opposed to like active duty, which a lot of my family members were, because that is literally what I wanted to do. I wanted to do because I saw the commercials of people flying in and on helicopters and saving people from hurricanes, like at Katrina. But obviously, living in California, we don't have hurricanes. Not a lot of that, but we did. I was often activated for things like wildfires because it's Southern California. We've helped out with stuff like that. And then when the pandemic happened, we were activated to help administer vaccines. And then I think I just mentally, I'm like, I think I need to just step away, and we're good now. And now I'm gonna just focus on going to school to be a marine biologist.
Yes, that was my next question.
Which is
so
my dream
that's
job.
Your science interest.
Yes. When I was a child, I would go to SeaWorld, and I would see the people swimming and playing with the dolphins and the whales and doing tricks. And I'm like, oh my God, I want to do that.
So what was it that got you interested in coming to CSICon the first time?
Aaron was very science-minded and got me into all of the really cool aspects of I'm friends with, or I have met, this random scientist, or this, scientist.
Look at this picture from
this scientist, or the amazing Randy and magicians and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh my.
So what last question, what's your perception of the difference, both of you guys, between the last time pre-pandemic and pre your service that you attended, and what do you think?
Some years have passed, and we've all been through COVID, and I think I do see a more appreciation in all of us here for this group and for being able to get together and have connections and bonding and socializing, especially with people that are like-minded in some important ways, when not being like-minded, capable of critical thinking, killed a lot of people. And for many of us, a lot of people we know,
Yeah.
And so I think there's that. And I think there's a very clear indication of the gravity of what we do.
Good point.
So I see that as a powerful difference. And then, just functionally, there's, I felt a very heavy medical orientation this year, which makes good sense. And also political, which despite people being made uncomfortable, I have always said, and I think is essential, because political is just how we organize ourselves as a species, and we can't avoid it. That has to be aligned with science. It has to be aligned with critical thinking and skepticism.
Yeah.
So I think that's good.
What do you think, Hannah?
It is a little bit of a smaller group, but I think it's a little bit more bonded. It feels like I felt super appreciative and honored to be welcomed because I had only ever been to one. I had never been to TAM. I had never, and people like you and a bunch of other people that I barely even talked to recognized me and welcomed me and said hi. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize that I had an impression.
You guys as a couple make an impression, especially at the Halloween party. These guys go all out. I'm amazed that they don't give you the prize. I don't understand it.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine.
I felt bad for the James Webb Telescope.
Yes.
The James Webb Telescope should have won.
Right.
Worked so hard.
Right. Mitchell Lambert was a James Webb Space Telescope, put a lot of effort into it, and didn't win a prize.
It was amazing. He did get a free drink. They felt bad. They were like, all right,
we
you
were
get a
all
free drink.
chanting for the James Webb. James Webb's out there doing hard work.
That's right.
But one of the things that I'm noticing that I now feel like I have a little bit more of a baseline that I can speak from, being more saturated in science and skepticism, is getting more young people involved, especially this time, because I know that there's fewer people than the one that I went to before. But
I don't think it was that much fewer.
Not that much, but I do see proportionally very few people that are my age or younger And I think it would be really great to try and get more of those people out here. Drag them in.
So the last one that we had, which was right before the pandemic, that you guys were not at, there actually was a concerted effort to do that.
That's awesome.
Right. They actually had a lot of teenage people walking around that had gotten free admission.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Nice. Susan Garbick helped sponsor grants, that kind of thing.
Yes.
I don't know if it's because we're still lingering in the pandemic that they didn't do it this year, but that'll probably happen.
That's totally
again.
Understandable. But it's, and also people.
And of course, we got to do it from both sides. Got to get them to want to come.
And the funds to get here.
In fact, as Skeptic Zone listeners might remember, because I reported on this at the last conference when it happened, several of the speakers went out to the schools locally and did presentations.
Oh, that is so
that's
cool.
Awesome.
So cool.
That would be so much fun.
Yeah, it was very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys for your time, and glad to see you this year again. Hope to see you again following years.
Yes,
you will.
Thank you
so much.
Wandering the halls of CSICon on Friday, and I'm looking for people to interview, and look who I run into, or listen to I run into. I'm sure this voice will be familiar to the Skeptic Zone listeners.
Hey, oof, don't run into me.
So, yes, I found Mr. Brian Dunning.
From Skeptoid.com.
What are you doing at the conference this year?
We came here for working reasons, and I say we, that's me, and then we have a new hire. Her name is Kathy Reitmeyer. She's our Director of Operations. And she has an amazing history in nonprofit management, as 30 years as an executive director of development. But she's new to the whole skeptic scene and this world. So she and I came, and I'm just going to be introducing her to people, and we're going to have a little, I think we're calling it our Skeptoid Roundtable or something. We've got a dozen or two Skeptoid members and listeners who are just showing up, and we're going to have kind of a brainstorming steering committee type meeting, like, what should we be doing with all of your money?
What did you like so far?
Honestly, there's always fantastic sessions and everything, but whenever I look back on conferences, my favorite part was always just hanging out with friends. You come to conferences like this and you got a million friends that you see once a year, and that's always the highlight for me. There's so many people here. It's truly a highlight of my year.
And of course, this hasn't happened here for 3 years.
Yeah, it's been weird not having conferences online. It just does not substitute.
But you, I know, were brave, and you actually went around while the pandemic was still a little worse than it is now, driving all over the country.
Yeah, we thought the pandemic was over. So yeah, that was October of last year, 2021. I did the Skeptoid Whistle Stop Tour, where I did 14 cities in 14 nights and gave a presentation or showed a movie or did something at each one of them. And there was sort of so much demand, we had to cut out Florida, and we had to cut out California and the Southwest. So we've just rescheduled Florida, and that's coming up in a couple of weeks here. The calendar is at skeptoid.com/calendar. And we've yet to reschedule the California stuff, and Southwest, but that's, I'm sure, going to happen pretty soon, because now we know that the pandemic is not really over, but it's manageable.
And last question. I am a contributor to the movie They Don't Want You to See, and
You
I
are.
cannot
Thank you.
wait for that. So yeah, just for people who don't know about that, talk a little bit about what is that about?
Yeah, so this is my current movie project. It's going to be another full feature-length documentary film for direct-to-streaming, so it'll be on Prime and Apple TV and all the usual streaming services. The movie is aimed at the UFO true believers. I'm really making a effort to sort of bridge the gap, make a movie that they are going to feel that is inclusive of them and their perspective, so that they will be interested in watching it and listening to what I have to say. And it's just going to be dropping a bunch of science bombs. My idea is that anyone, no matter what your perspective on UFOs is, if you're a true believer, if you're a 100% skeptic or denier, that your position will be better informed by science after seeing this movie. It's called the UFO Movie They Don't Want You to See, and you can find out everything about it at theufo.movie.
I actually posted this on my Facebook page, and I had several people comment, "Who's they? What are you talking about?"
and that's a great thing about the title, because everyone talks about the title.
It was a conversation starter for sure. Okay, thank you, Brian. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Okay, thanks a lot. It's great to see you.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Coming up on next week's show, I hope to bring you some interviews with our European guests flying into Sydney to make their way to Canberra for our big national convention. Also, the last of the interviews from CSICon with Rob Palmer. And next week, the Trove revisits the old faithful topic of UFOs, because there are endless stories and reports and whatnot about UFOs going back through the decades in Australian newspapers. Thank you to those people who continue to support the Skeptic Zone at skepticzone.tv. It's because of you that everybody else can listen to the Skeptic Zone, and I get to put it together every week. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from early morning. The sun is not up, it's still dark outside, but the birds are singing anyway, and the rain's coming down. Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.
Oh, dice game. We can do the dice game. We got time.
All right. Hello to people who listen after the music. People, thank you, Susan. People who listen after the music to the Skeptic Zone podcast. It's time once again to play the dice game, where I'm going to roll a D10. I'm going to roll it 3 times, and you have to use your psychic magic predicting dumb luck powers or whatever you want to do. You can cheat. You can listen to the show, then go rewind and listen to it again and say, see, I got them all. Joining me this week are a cast of thousands, including Susan Gobeck. Hello, Susan.
Hi, Richard. Hi, Skeptic Zone listeners. I'm back.
You're back. And many faces I'm looking at on my screen. Okay, here we go. So everybody who's watching along, because we're playing Susan's Trivia, I'm going to turn the chat on, or the chat should be on for everybody, or just switch the chat on and put your guess. It's out of 1 to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Put your guess in the chat now for the first roll of the die.
Ooh.
4, 8, 7, 7.
Oh, wait, where's the chat? Oh, there it is.
This looks like some sort of weird code. If you put in these numbers, 2, 4, 5. Nobody's put 10 yet. That's interesting. Oh, somebody put 3.14159.
Oh, that's one.
All right, here we go. And I've been accused before of cheating. You know, people say that's not really the number that's come up. I'm just going to make sure that you can all see clearly.
Why would you cheat, though?
Because I always get 5. I always guess 5. And see,
all right.
The one time that we got all 5s.
There's no benefit for him cheating. Like, he's not going to win money.
Okay, here we go. We can't see it.
I know.
It's a 6.
6.
4, 5. 4.
First number.
Got 6.
First number is 6. So if you've got 6, well done.
So if it comes up 666, is the devil going to appear?
Yes. Next
what
roll.
number of people have 6? Okay, here's the next.
Type in your guesses right now for the next roll. That was
okay,
1. Here comes it. 5, 2, 6, 6, 2. It should be my phone number, I think. 3, 4, 4.
Nobody's ever picking 10.
I don't know why. Okay, here it comes. Here it comes. Ah, that's interesting.
I can't see
it. You have to be very careful. It's a 6 again.
Ooh. If 3 6s come up, the devil.
Is this the dice roller that Greg DeRay gave you?
It's a 9.
Machine made in Nevada for their voters.
Richard, is this the dice? Is this the dice roller that Greg DeRay gave you?
It certainly is. It's a 9. Sorry. I thought I'd get it.
Well, you're upside down. You're in Australia, aren't you?
Okay, last one. Last one. Here it comes. Oh, put in your guesses. What do we got? 4, 7, 8, 8. Oh, they're coming in thick and fast. 12, somebody
Everybody gets
says.
so excited.
If I can, here it comes. And so you can't press everything, Rob Palmer. Okay.
You just press the same number.
Okay. Oh,
Two.
stupid
Two.
two. How could
It's
there
an
not be a
upside-down
single
7.
5 in that whole thing?
So
I blame Greg Doré.
There's no 5 on that dice. That's how we.
today's winning numbers here 6, 9, and 2. And just to please.
You could have picked up.
He just switched it to another dice.
He switched
If
a
you
pretty
could
good
bend,
trick.
if you could bend tableware, you could pick up another dice and trick us.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
He probably can make a origami dice.